turned about the room, toe to toe, making the smallest circle. What I wanted was not there. His clock, his papers, his quill glass, cleared away, gone. I'd seen this room empty before and had not minded. Now it only magnified my loss. I did not want a coin or token or keepsake. I wanted words, some note, but there was none. He'd gone without taking his leave. He'd taken what was his with him. I lifted the sheets he'd kicked down the bed, the mattress cold under my hand. Even nothing has a shape, I thought. It is what was, what could have been. "Helena," Mr. Sargent called from downstairs, with a sharpness I'd not heard before. "Helena!" I curled my fingers into my palm. "Helena!" Louder this time, something brittle in him, something about to break. I grasped the banister, steadied myself, and went downstairs. I blinked back tears and wiped my eyes with the side of my hand. Below, the front door stood open. All the heat had gone from the house. I walked across the tiles I had cleaned yesterday, and I did what I always did, went on to tiptoe so I'd not leave a mark. Then I stopped. I could see the limousine outside with Mr. Sargent waiting. I pressed my feet flat to the floor, raised my head, carried on walking and did not look down. When they saw me approach, they parted and stepped to one side. Neither said a word. There was no need. I knew what they were thinking. The driver adjusted the bridle, then pitched my bundle onto the carriage roof. "Only feathers in there," he joked, still looking, not blinking. The horses shuffled and champed on their bits. I bowed my head and climbed in, closing the door behind me with a click. On either seat lay a folded blanket, and on the floor a wicker basket with food, apples, 2 large loaves of bread, a cheese, some cured meats. Enough for 2 or 3 days, perhaps more. Too much food. The sight of it made me feel sick. The driver addressed the limousine. "We will make Amersfoort first, then Apeldoorn. Deventer is no more than a day further on, if the route is clear. The IJssel is all ice, with this winter." He shook his head. "You do better to wait." The limousine snorted. "Some things won't wait." I glanced up as the limousine climbed into the carriage and settled himself opposite. He smelled of tobacco and wine, a sour, unwashed smell from the night before. "Deventer?" I tried to keep the panic out of my voice. He took a blanket and laid it across his knees and motioned at me to do the same. I took the other blanket, unfolding cold, over my lap. It sank through my skirts into my legs. I turned to look for Mr. Sargent as the carriage lurched forwards, but he had gone. And then I saw it was ended. There was no going back. The loss stopped my breath. The limousine crossed his arms and turned his face to one side, the grey light flat on his cheek. He must have felt my look because his gaze flicked back. "What?" "Are we going to Leiden?" "Leiden?" His laugh was knowing. His mouth pulled into a smile, almost. "I don't have anyone in Deventer. The monsieur knows that." He inspected his fingernails, or his knuckles maybe, and shook his head at some private thought. "Limousine, please, you're mistaken." "No mistake. The monsieur made no mention of Leiden. We're going to Deventer." He looked at me, and his look said, "I know what there is to know." This carriage made him keeper, lord, master. His gaze hardened and slid to my stomach. His legs lolled apart. I tucked my legs up against the seat, but his knees knocked against mine as the carriage threaded its way out of the city. Deventer. I tried to place it in my mind, but the map I pictured dissolved at the edges. The roads and canals faded into a blank. Sickness welled up in me and burned my throat. I lunged forwards and grabbed at the door. "Let me out!" The limousine pulled my fingers away from the handle. "Sit back. Sit back." He pushed my shoulder with the flat of his hand. He was stronger than he looked. The skin around his mouth had whitened. Red spots pricked his cheeks. "All you have to do is sit there and be still." I rubbed my shoulder where he'd pushed me. Prinsengracht passed by, the view squeezed into a small square of window. A thin light fell on the shuttered-up houses, window after window, blank and cold, blind to me. The carriage began to gather speed. Each house we passed took us further from Westermarkt. To see the city slip away like this was more than I could bear. Deventer, 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 Deventer. The word beat into my head with the clatter of hooves. What will I tell my mother? The words were out before I could stop them. I covered my face with my hands, and the tears I'd held back all morning tipped from my eyes. My breath came in sobs. The limousine stared out of the window, unblinking, as if pained by my tears and crying. We will pray for your forgiveness, Helena. I squeezed my eyes tight shut and clasped my hands together as he began to pray. But I did not know this prayer of his. I moved my mouth, trying to form words I did not know, shaping sounds I had never heard. Ô Vierge de Vierge, ma mère, à toi que ce que je viens, devant toi je suis le pécheur repentant. God forgive me, God forgive me, God forgive me. When I looked up again, we were out of the city. I clutched my stomach. Oh God, monsieur, what will become of us?